You know, I always think it's funny when people say Shoegaze is dead, because imagine being Kevin Shields in the 90s in the midst of making Loveless, losing your mind, breaking amps, and hiring like 50 engineers, and ending up putting the band in about 200 grand debt, and then hearing someone say the genre you tried to make perfect is dead. But yeah, quick history lesson on shoegaze for those who aren't familiar. Shoegaze music started to come to prominence in the late 80s and reached its peak around the 90s. The name shoegaze is quite literal, as when artists are performing live, they are often gazing at the effect pedals on the floor. These effect pedals cause for the sound to be extremely distorted and noisy. Reverb is also an important component of the music, as combined with the distortion, it builds this wall of sound covered by haze and noise. In summary, shoegaze is if you take noise pop and dream pop and combine them. When looking at how shoegaze first came about, we must go back to the artists that didn't necessarily make shoegaze, but are heavy influences for it. The Cocteau Twins, some people even consider these lot as shoegaze, but I think they're definitely dream pop. Notable dream pop releases from them are Treasure, Bluebell No, and obviously Heaven or Las Vegas. All these albums shaped the way shoegaze sounds today with their ethereal and lush soundscapes, and also the vocals that are really hard to understand. And that's just one of the many classic elements of shoegaze that Cocteau Twins implemented all the way back in the 80s. Jesus and the Mary Chain are another worthy mention of influences for the genre, as their noise pop / noise rock album in Psycho Candy definitely laid down the foundation for shoegaze. It's a shame they went in a different direction afterwards and didn't want to keep going with the noise pop feel. The last band I'll mention for this pre-shoegaze era is Lush. I think their 1990 compilation Gala stands out as one of my favorite dream pop releases I've heard. They mix dreamy sounds with post-punk and it meshes perfectly. The main highlights out of this compilation for me is the soft hypnotic vocals of Mickey that are parallel to the loud and powerful guitar. So now, let's talk about the first shoegaze album to be released. Isn't Anything by none other than My Bloody Valentine. The calm before the storm for MBV. Isn't Anything stands as a really solid release, and I think it culminates all of MBV's previous EPs into this fresh new sound perfectly. It was released in 1988, and at the time, provided the blueprint for all shoegaze albums to come. After My Bloody Valentine knocked it out of the park on their first shoegaze album, the question is, who will follow that up? From 1990 to 1991, we see albums like Taste by Telescopes, Book of Days by Psychedelic Fur, Nowhere by Ride, Strange Free World by Kitchen of Distinction, Whirlpool by Chapter House, and Raised by Swell Driver all continue to build upon the original shoegaze sound from Isn't Anything. All these albums so far have been solid, with my personal favourite being Whirlpool by Chapter House. It is very dreamy, and it feels like a fresh breeze on a hot summer's day. But anyway, all these albums definitely helped the genre grow out more and more, but whilst all these albums are seeing success, there was something that had been brewing in the background. After the release of Isn't Anything, MBV did some tour dates and got right back in the studio to make a follow-up album to Isn't Anything. They wanted to continue their shoegaze sound, and the label said, sure, you got 5 days to make this album. Well, 5 days ended up turning into months, and months ended up turning into years. Quite frankly, Kevin Shields was not going to be satisfied with this new album until it was perfect, until it was the shoegaze album. Finally, after 250 grand, countless engineers, broken equipment, and a bankrupted record label, Loveless was ready. So now, the date is November 4th, 1991, and everything known about the shoegaze world was about to change. Loveless was released for everyone to see, and it did okay. It charted at 24th domestically and didn't chart at all internationally. Some may see that as a failure, but who really cares about the money side of music? Because sure, if you look at it from a financial standpoint, Loveless did fail. But if you look at it from any other perspective, you'll know Loveless changed the way we hear shoegaze, and its influence wasn't just bound to shoegaze. It inspired bands like Smashing Pumpkins, Radiohead, and Deafheaven. Anyways, as for shoegaze, we now have Loveless in almost every release we listen to. The more popular examples of its influence you can hear is in Slowdive's iconic album Souvlaki, Flying Saucer Attack self-titled, and Starflyer 59's self-titled album as well. You can also find 100 million different clones of MBV, so yeah, they are definitely influential. After 1995, shoegaze slowed down a lot, as notable releases were far and few between. So that begs the question, is shoegaze dead? Well, the answer is no. Yeah, modern shoegaze may be commercially dead, but you can still find great albums all around the scene. I'd like to start as early as the 2000s with Fleeting Joy's album, Despondent Transponder. This album takes what the 90s did right with shoegaze and adds a real heavy and emotional feel. Despondent Transponder depicts a confusing breakup between a couple. They don't know whether to keep trying to get back together or just let go. The vocals are some of the highlights from the album, as both John and Rorika share to shine with their amazing singing. Backed by that classic loud hazy guitar, this album sets the clock back to the early 90s when shoegaze was in its prime. Another 2000 shoegaze album I feel obligated to mention is Crush by Astro Bright. If you like loud and heavy sounds of Loveless, I urge you to check out Astro Bright. It's probably the loudest, most brash shoegaze album I've heard, and honestly, it borders the noise rock genre with how harsh it can get. Other notable releases from the 2000s include the Texas Jerusalem Crossroads, Another Sunny Day by Honey Dip, Constance by South Pacific, and the split album between My Dead Girlfriend and Sojo Ship, Sweet Days and Her Last Kiss. And for those who don't know My Dead Girlfriend, it's that one like nostalgia bait thing on Twitter where they do all the like 2010s shit. Yeah, it has their song in the background. Anyway, more albums from the 2000s that are worth mentioning. Rumskib, self-titled, the genre-bending release of Why We Not Perfect by Jesu, and finally, what I consider to be the greatest shoegaze release of all time, No Not Loveless, but instead, Deathconsciousness by Have a Nice Life. It mixes shoegaze with post-punk, some gothic elements, drone, doom/black gaze, to make this earth-shattering record that will immediately send you into a dark place. It all starts with a quick one before the Eternal Worm devours Connecticut, which, side note, is one of my favorite track titles ever. It's this beautiful ambient piece which gets more and more emotional and sentimental as the track goes on. 7 minutes of this, and near the end of the track, we hear echoing voices, which takes us directly into the next track and one of my favorite songs of all time, Blood Hail. Everything about this song is perfection. The lyrics, the vocals, the beautiful story it portrays, the eerie guitar backed by that heavy bass all throughout the track. It's simple, but it's so effective. I could try and explain this song, but I'd rather just use a quote from Dan Barrett himself. He says, "It's the end of the world, and God is wreaking havoc on existence. Human beings, the world, pile over their broken bodies into a giant stairway from which every remaining survivor shoots handmade arrows into the sky, killing God and causing his blood, frozen in an infinite cold of space, to fall like hail onto the earth." And yeah, that sums it up better than I could ever say it. Deathconsciousness may not have one big story to follow, but you can gather countless mini stories within each song. I mainly find these mini stories to touch on themes of death and the overall brutal nature of humans, especially death as in Blood Hail and Hunter, as it states how God must even face death one day. If you can manage to find 10 Have a Nice Life fans outside, then ask them what are their concepts of the track, and each one of them will give you a different answer. The album story isn't set in stone, so you can kind of just think for yourself and make up your own cool story. Now onto the 2010s shoegaze releases. This is probably the weakest decade of shoegaze for me personally, and I think it's why a lot of people consider the genre to be dead. Nevertheless, there's still some absolute gems to come out of this era. California Nebula by the Chinese shoegaze band Default, Have a Nice Life's great follow-up to Deathconsciousness in the Unnatural World. We also had two shoegaze icons return for the first time in a decade, with Slowdive releasing their self-titled album in 2017, and My Bloody Valentine also releasing their self-titled in 2013. Ceres and Calypso in the Deep Time is probably the most well-received album from this time period, as it leans into a more dream pop style. The album sounds like you're exploring a rainforest during a prehistoric time with its lush and rich soundscapes. It's another concept album like Deathconsciousness, and I think it's safe to say that shoegaze concept albums always perform extremely well. If you're a shoegaze artist and you're listening to this, tell your bandmates that you guys should do a concept album. I'll rate it really highly. Some other good albums include Ariel Lovefeed's self-titled album. Another iconic shoegaze artist from this time is Sadness, with his best work being I Want There to Be, and I think Leave comes in as a close second to that. Also, a really underrated shoegaze artist that I've found is Blush Response. He's also Australian, so shout out to him. High School Doll is an absolute classic, and the single Vertigo is one of my favorite shoegaze songs of all time. So definitely go check them out. But when it comes to my favorite bands from this era, only really two bands come to mind, and that's Were and They're Getting a Body of Water. Were cemented themselves within the shoegaze scene with their cold and distant sound. From 2010, they've consistently been releasing great music. They started with Distressor, and then in 2013, releasing Pipe Dreams. In 2014, they released a split EP with Nothing, which has the most popular song, Ease. My favorite album from them has to be Feels Like You, coming out in 2019. Easily their best vocal performance out of all their albums. The beautiful vocals are followed by that iconic cold feel word gives to their music. I'd like to highlight the transitions between the songs. They're brilliant and they just make listening so rewarding. Overall, I think the best way to describe Were is like having the worst day of your life while it's gloomy, cloudy, and raining outside, and it's also freezing. Now, on to Tagabow, who for me are the most interesting shoegaze band that I've heard. They try their hand at all these different genres such as slacker rock, instrumental hip-hop, indie-tronica, slowcore, drum and bass, and noise rock. They mix all these sounds together and they just find a way to make it mesh. A band that isn't afraid to experiment and push the boundaries is exactly what shoegaze needs, especially when you have so many people calling it a repetitive genre. Without a doubt, Destiny XL is their best album, as they lean into the more classic shoegaze feel. Songs like French, 63 Skies, Violence Eye, and A Wasp Appears all have these heavy yet stunning tones, while songs like ES Beauty Hand and I Would Love You break up the album quite nicely as they go into this wacky electronic sort of direction. Whilst we're on the topic of Tagabow, they just released a really solid album in Lotto, and I think you guys should check that out as well. Now finally, onto the 2020s, and I think the 2020s is the strongest we've seen shoegaze since the 90s. Firstly, the two goats of this era, What Is Your Name and Paranoid. They've led the charge of new experimental sounds and making absolute classics in the Now, and the Never, and to see the next part of the dream. The Now, and the Never I talked about in my last video, so to put it briefly, imagine you're back, reminiscing about the summer you just had. What Is Your Name mixes lush electronic sounds with a classic shoegaze feel, and also has amazing sampling choices, even sampling Slowdive. Now, to see the next part of the dream has become a staple of modern day shoegaze, and I feel is now the standard for the genre. This album is filled with emotion. The album touches on themes of not wanting to grow up, depression, and finding yourself. If you've listened to the album, you know it's heavily inspired by the movie All About Lily Choo Choo. Now, as you can probably tell from that pronunciation, I haven't actually watched this film, but the influence is obviously there, as the movie is sampled countless of times, and the cover is an animated version of a shot from the film. I think if you're someone looking for a different feel when it comes to shoegaze, this album is the one for you. I previously mentioned Sadness, and well, he's also released plenty of bangers in the 2020s. Not including split albums, my personal favourites have been the 3-album run from Your Perfect Hands and My Repeated World to I Love You All, releasing in 2024. Tokyo Shoegaze caught my eye with their 2022 album Moonworld Playground. Another artist who also caught my eye and surprised me a lot when I first listened to the album was Jane Remover. I mean, knowing what we know now about their music, Census Designated is a far cry from Revenge Seekers. They've come a long way, and I think for the better. But Census Designated is still a banger. But there's actually a shoegaze artist who's friends with Jane that I also listen to, known as Quanek. Even though Jane stepped away from the genre, imagine a collab between these two. And Sophia still stands as best album with classics like Soil, Life Imitates Life, and Think With Your Lungs. To be honest, I don't think Quanek has released anything close to this, but Step Drain and Warbrained are still worth checking out. And going back to Were now, they released Raw Blue, which continues the theme of Feels Like You, a slow, cold album that just leaves you with an empty feeling. Clarion came to my attention last year with their extremely catchy song Hello Juliet, and since then they've been a joy to listen to. Their self-titled EP was one of my favourite releases from 2024, and I can't wait to see what they do next. Julie have been releasing great shoegaze albums non-stop, and they make the most of having both great male and female vocalists. They're incredibly catchy and have riffs I could listen to for days. Pushing Daisies and Anti-Aircraft Friend are both amazing albums. Moving on to an extremely interesting band where the lead singer sings in Arabic. The band resides in the USA, and I'm sure you can understand the challenges and the issues a Middle Eastern man would face in the US within the current political climate. The band touched on themes of being Arab, modern day masculinity, and nostalgia. Another little cool fact is that the lead singer is actually a high school teacher. I wish my high school teachers were that cool. And lastly, an album that hits us with a throwback. Spindrift by Roving relies on the old school style of shoegaze, but still manages to put a nice twist on it for the sound to still feel refreshing. So after I've just listed all these bands and albums, I think it is extremely safe to say shoegaze isn't dead and is in safe hands. And I'd actually go as far to say that the genre is in its new prime, as we have so many talented artists from the 2020s making these classic albums that will be remembered alongside all the hits from the 90s. But yeah, that's the video done, and I'm sure I've missed or skipped an artist or album, so feel free to leave a hate comment about it, or preferably recommend some great artists in the comments. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you found some cool music from this. Make sure to like, subscribe, join the Discord, and follow my TikTok and Rhyme. Bye.